It is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my expose in the history of Magic the Gathering. We're continuing with Judgement, the third set of the Odyssey block and the second of the small sets. So this had 143 cards and was released on May 27th of 2002. Now it had the mechanics of Advocates, Graveyard Matters, Nightmares, Phantoms, Punishers, Incarnations, and Wishes. And it continued with the two keywords of Flashback and Threshold. Now its symbol represented scales for the Scales of Justice. Now this set was meant to complement Torment. This was a green-white heavy set. That means it made up for the fact that Torment didn't have a lot of green and white, that it was more black-centric. This was green and white-centric. It had much more green and white cards than black, with blue and red cards sort of in the middle between that. It also brought back multicolored cards, but the majority of the multicolored cards had to do with green and white. So were the non-basic lands. So the fact is there was a lot more, similar to within Torment, there was a lot of cards that had either black or swamp mentioned on it. There was a lot more cards in this set that were mentioned green/white, or plain/forest. So you could see there was an insurgence of this, and it made an empowered green and white decks a lot more. So it made it a lot more powerful of a color, or set of colors, I should say. The set also featured Sylvan Safekeeping, which was Ollie Raid's invitational card. So that's an interesting one there. Also interesting to note, this was the first set that was released both simultaneously with the normal release version of it and the Magic Online version of the cards. So this is the first time that we saw both versions of these cards released at the same time. So it sold in 15 card booster packs, 4 pre-constructed decks, and of course a fat pack. The pre-release card was Glory in Hebrew. This is the last time that Magic did one of these promo pre-release cards in a foreign language. So this is like different than normal would be for the language when they're releasing it. So this is, no longer are they doing this. So we've seen a collection of them for the last couple of pre-releases, last bunch of them. Regardless, the pre-release was on May 18th, 2002, and it was actually accompanied by a novel of the exact same name as it. So interesting that it's different from the last one, which had a novel that was a slightly different name. We're back having the novel the exact same name as the set. Now the storyline once again follows Kamal. We're focusing on him again. Chainer is dead, and he has promised to basically keep the Mirai safe and keep it out of the hands of those that would abuse it. But Kamal has to deal with its temptations. He returns to his tribe, to his sister, Jessica, and his trainer, Balthor. He sort of stays with them for a time period, but the Mirai continues to work on his mind. Eventually, he's driven off and goes to Crozen Forest. A lot of people die along the way. He eventually ends up battling with Lakutis, the ambassador, and basically striking him down and impaling him with his sword, in which the Mirai is in the hilt. He then abandons his sword there, the magic of the Mirai, invigorating the Crozen Forest, and he basically leaves it at this point in time. He basically is able to set it down. So we can see where the storyline sort of ends there, with a lot of people dead, and Kamal separating himself from the Mirai. Now, just like before, Flashback continued, Threshold continued, and Nightmare Creatures continued, but it introduced 4 new things that I want to talk about for the mechanics. Advocates. An advocate had an ability that when activated would return a card from an opponent's graveyard to their hand for you to gain a beneficial benefit. So basically, you gave cards from their opponent's graveyard back into their hand, and in return, you got something out of it. That's what the advocates do. Incarnations were creatures that had static abilities that would activate when they were in your graveyard. So if I had an incarnation, when it's out in play, it's just its creature. But as soon as it hits my graveyard, it gives off some kind of ability that either affect my creatures or something else in play that it has to be in my graveyard for this effect to be active. Now, Phantoms were creatures that came into play with a number of +1/+1 counters. The caveat about them is when they would be dealt damage, instead you prevent that damage and remove a +1/+1 counter. So each instance of dealing damage to a phantom creature removes a counter from it, but then they don't take that damage. And finally, there are the wishes. The wishes were a very interesting one because the wish allowed you, depending on the type of wish, to search your out of game for a card and put it into your hand. Effectively, you'd search your sideboard or your collection. It had to be a card you owned. But you would take whatever type of wish it would tell you the type of card that you're looking for or allowed to look for, you get it, you put it in your hand, and guess what? You can play it now. Of course, you would always exile the wish afterwards, but effectively you're switching that wish out for whatever you need at this point in time effectively to win the game. Or at least to get a better position in the game. Yay, I'm searching for that in whatever I have optional that I own. This led to a lot of interesting and powerful combos. So there was 3 cycles I do want to talk about. First off is single drop common mana creatures. They're effectively common, cost you 1 mana, they're 1/1s, and each of them would have an ability that you could sacrifice them for something. There was a cycle of them with all the colors, so those were pretty good. There was the incarnation cycle, which I did talk about a little bit, the uncommon ones, that each of them, again, graveyard, you get an ability. And of course the cycle of wishes. There was 5 wishes, 1 of every color, and each of them was very powerful. I did talk about what they did. They just ramped up the power level of decks greatly during this time. So there was also 2 vertical cycles of, well, nightmares. There was red nightmares called Gorgers. The Gorgers would, of course, have a come-into-play effect and a leave-of-play effect, less like nightmares, but they would also have a negative effect caused to you while you had them out in play. So yes, you'd hit your opponent with something, you'd have to basically pay some kind of cost. If it would leave pay, it would also hit your opponent again, traditionally. And there was a cycle of those. There was also a cycle of Worm Fangs, which were effectively the exact same thing, but blue. Different kind of negative effects for you having them out in play that would affect you, more blue aligned rather than red aligned, but again, it's still the same concept of comes into play has an effect, leaves play has an effect, kind of messes with you while it's in play. There was also a pair, a mirror pair. There was Defy Gravity and Canopy Claws. One of these would give flying, the other would remove flying. They both had 1 cost flashbacks, so you can see how they were mirrored. Now there were 2 reprints in this set, including Urnham Nujin. So those were one of the 2 reprints. It had 6 simply better cards. Simply better meaning they just were superior, and why would you not use this card instead, including Envelop instead of Extinguish. So they just, 6 cards that were effectively completely replacing 6 older ones that you wouldn't play with anymore because, hey, there's one that's just better than it all around. Now the 4 pre-constructed decks were a blue-red called Air Razors, a white deck called Inundation, a green deck called Painflow, and a white-green deck called Spectral Slam. Let's talk about some cards from the set. First off, Burning Wish. You search outside of the game for in amongst cards you own for a sorcery, you reveal it, put it in your hand, exile Burning Wish. So this is a wish that grants you a sorcery. It happened to be one of the more powerful ones because you could search that perfect red burn spell that you need right at that moment to really get the victory. So this one was one of the more powerful ones. Cabal Therapy. You name a non-land card, you look at target opponent's hand, and they discard all cards that match that same name. It has a flashback of sacrificing a creature. So this is the advantage of it. You already figure out what their hand is. If you have a creature in play, sacrifice it. Guess what? You knew if there was a card you really wanted to get rid of. You fished the first time. Second time, you get what you want. There was Arcane Teachings. The enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and could tap to deal damage to a creature or player. Basically made you ultra-powerful Timmy kind of character, like the Phyrexian Sorcerer. Balthor the Defiled. Hey, guess what? It's our friend Balthor we talked about in legend form, except this time a zombie. All other minions get +1/+1. He's a 2/2. And for 3 black mana, you can remove him from the game. All players return all red and black creatures from your graveyards to play. So, I mean, if you're playing red and black deck, you can resurrect everything. There's Battle Screech. You put 2 1/1 white bird creature tokens into play. It has a flashback of tapping 3 white creatures. So if you had a 3rd creature out, guess what? You can automatically, the first time you play it, play Battle Screech right away again. Pretty good that way. Breaking Point. Any player may have it deal 6 Breaking Point deals 6 damage to them. If no player does, Breaking Point destroys all creatures. They cannot be regenerated. So basically, you play it, and you're destroying all creatures, and if anybody wants to keep things out, they have this spell deal 6 damage to them. It's that, or destroy it all. In a similar retrospect is Browbeat. If no player has Browbeat deal 5 damage to them, then target player draws 3 cards. So you could be like, I want to draw 3 cards. You can cast it on yourself. Then all the other players would be like, well, do I want to take 5 damage to prevent you from drawing 3 cards? That's the question. Crash of Worms. Put 3 6/6 green worm creature tokens into play. For 9 mana and 3 green, you can flash back. 6/6 worms are pretty good. Dwarven Driller. It's nothing really special for power and toughness, but you could tap it to destroy target land. Unless that land's controller has Dwarven Driller deal 2 damage to them. So you can threaten to destroy an opponent's lands with a Dwarven Driller, or they could take damage. Elephant Guide. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3. If enchanted creature is put into the graveyard, you get a 3/3 green elephant creature token. To replace the creature you had just die. Epic Struggle. If at the beginning of your upkeep you control 20 or more creatures, you win the game. Great in a token deck if you want alternate win conditions. Firecat Blitz. An X-Cause spell that puts X 1/1 haste cat tokens into play that are exiled at the beginning of the next end step. So basically you can throw out a bunch of cats, hit them, but it also has flashback of 2 red and sacrificing X mountains, meaning that's how many you figure out what it is for X, not X mana, it's sacrificing mountains instead, that you can hit them once again with more Firecats. Genesis. Incarnation. If it's in the graveyard, then you may pay 2 colors and a green to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This has to be done at the beginning of your upkeep still. There's Glory. 3/3 flyer. Incarnation. If it's in your graveyard, you can pay 2 colorless white and name a color. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain protection from that color. There's Hunting Grounds. Doesn't do anything on its own, but it has Threshold. That if an opponent would play a spell, you may pay a creature card from your hand into play. That's a good one there. Jessica, Warrior Adept. She's a 3/1 first strike haste that taps to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Jessica's not bad. She's like a lesser version of Kamal. Mirari's Wake. This is a really good one that if you're looking for a great card for green and white decks, I recommend Mirari's Wake. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever you tap a land you control for mana, it produces 1 extra mana of a type that land could produce. Any type that land could produce. So basically, gets your creatures bigger, doubles your mana production. That's a really good one. Morality Shift. You exchange your library and your graveyard. Shuffle your library. Well, your new library. If you're running out of cards, hey, guess what? Great to do that. Or if you just want a lot of cards in your graveyard, for whatever reason, also good. Nomad Mythmaker. For 1 white and tap it, you can return a enchant creature or a card from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to a creature you control. So effectively, you can get back your enchant creature auras very easily. Phantom Nantaku. It's a phantom creature. Comes to play with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. It has trample. Of course, if damage is dealt to it, you remove one of those counters, but it can also tap to put a +1/+1 counter on itself. So it can keep getting itself bigger also. Riftstone Portal. This is an interesting one. You could tap it for colorless, or as long as it's in your graveyard, your lands have the ability to tap, add 1 white or 1 green mana to your mana pool. So effectively, as long as it's in the graveyard, all of your lands tap for green and white. Also, Seed Time. You can only play Seed Time during your turn. You can only get the better effects of Seed Time if an opponent has played a blue spell this turn. You take an extra turn. So you take an extra turn as long as an opponent's played a blue spell this turn. So effectively you play something, maybe it gets countered. Maybe your opponent plays some kind of blue spell. You then just throw that in there and take an extra turn. Silver Seraph, 6/6 Flying Angel. It has a threshold of other creatures you control get +2/+2. Solitary Confinement. At the beginning of your upkeep, you have to discard a card or you get rid of Solitary Confinement. You skip your draw step, but you have Shroud and you prevent all damage that be dealt to you. Little big bonuses for that. Telekinetic Bond. Whenever a player discards a card, you may pay colorless and a blue to tap or untap a target creature. Test of Endurance. If at the beginning of your upkeep you have 50 or more life, you win the game. Thriss, Noctu Primus. It's a 5/5 that for 1 green tap it. Target creature you control gets +5/+5 until end of turn. World Gorger Dragon. It's a 7/7 flying trample. When it comes into play, you exile all other permanents you control. When it leaves play, you return all exiled permanents that you would exile with this back into play. So, I mean, you have everything as long as it's away, but then it comes back. So that's it for today. I introduced you to Judgement, an interesting set of Magic the Gathering, which has this sort of juxtaposition, the fact that it has a focus on green and white, which Torment, the set before, basically ignored completely. So you can see that these two sets balance each other in a way, made to basically balance out the colors still, even though Magic was trying to throw off the balance with these two sets. So they combined form a very interesting experiment. That they didn't want to quite go so far as to make it that one color was always going to be unbalanced. They made sure to even it out, at least in the end. So very interesting what they did. Leading into more of the same storyline, though, still. The next block, it does continue Kamal's story. But regardless, if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, The Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can go check out my Patreon, link in the description below. If you want to check out some other great Magic the Gathering content, you can check out Card Bazaar, They Said We Said, and Tasty Snackies. They always do some great Magic the Gathering content. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.